Greetings and welcome to the Future of Puerto Rico's Electric Grid, the Challenges and Path Forward, hosted by the Puerto Rican Student Organization, PRSO, at American University, along with Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora, Vamos for PR, and the AU School of Communication. I'm Daniela Martina Berrios, co-founder and president of the Puerto Rican Student Organization here, and PRSO wants to extend our deepest thanks to our collaborators and co-sponsors, the AU Office of Sustainability, and Delta Phi Epsilon Professional Foreign Service Sorority. PRSO, formerly known as Boricuas at AU, works to engage and empower Puerto Rican, Latinx, and non-Latinx students to raise awareness on Puerto Rican social, political, economic, and racial issues. It acts as a safe space for students and community members to gather and celebrate their shared Puerto Rican culture and Spanish language. PRSO serves as a platform for students to hold discussions such as this one, and activities on Puerto Rican and Latinx issues to further raise awareness and educate the American University and DMV community. In addition, we want to thank Elisa Sepulveda Carlo and Daniel Vázquez Diaz, co-founders of Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora, for their hard work, support, and dedication in planning this event. It's really been an honor to be able to work closely with both of you during this whole process, and being able to receive your unconditional support was a major driving force in our motivation to continue working for Puerto Rico. Also, I want to give a special recognition to Luis Ponce from Vamos for PR, because without you, this event could not be possible today. So thank you for all your help and support. I also want to personally thank our beautiful executive board members, Ana, Ricardo, Sabrina, Camelia, and Angelica, for their hard work on what's been the largest event we've put on thus far. I am very excited for what's to come next semester, which will unfortunately be my last semester here at AU. And now, without further ado, I'm going to welcome our keynote speaker, Ruth Santiago, to the stage. Ruth Santiago is a resident of the municipality of Salinas in southeastern Puerto Rico, where she has worked with the community and environmental groups, fishers associations, and other organizations for over 30 years on projects ranging from a community newspaper, children's services, and a community school, ecotourism project, to a rooftop solar energy pilot project. Ruth has been involved in the establishment of broad alliances to prevent water pollution from landfills, power plant emissions and discharges, and coal combustion residual waste, and promote solar communities and energy democracy, in addition to litigation in courts and administrative agencies. Ruth has organized and promoted environmental education projects, advised community groups, and the Lobos-based National Estuarine Resource Reserve on watershed protection and land use issues. Most recently, Ruth has worked on cases related to energy projects and integrated resource plans. Ms. Santiago earned degrees from Lehigh University and Columbia Law School, as well as published articles on energy issues in Puerto Rico. She is the recipient of the Robert Bullard 2018 Environmental Justice Award. Please enjoy me in welcoming Ruth Santiago to the stage.
Hello everyone, very happy to be here. Thank you all for your continuing interest in Puerto Rico. It's been a while now since the hurricane, and we know it's hard to keep a focus on these issues because people, the diaspora, as much interest as it has issues to address here in the States as well. So thank you all for being here, for all the groups and people who contributed to making this activity possible. So I think what I'll do is, first of all, I have a short statement, and then I'll go to the presentation, so we'll have a little variety here. And then, of course, afterwards we'll have questions. The title of my talk is Energy Generation and Democracy, and I hope I pique your interest with that. What on earth does energy generation have to do with democracy, right? So more than a year after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still depending on unreliable transmission lines that transport energy from large central station fossil fuel plants in the southern part of the island through the central mountain range and tropical forests to the load centers in the San Juan metro area in northern Puerto Rico, rather than rooftop solar communities, energy efficiency and demand response programs, as well as energy storage. The transmission lines are frail and subject to constant breakdowns, like the failures which have caused multiple blackouts since the hurricane, right after the hurricane, leaving tens of thousands of households in Puerto Rico without power for hours or even days. Various large power outages, like the two in April of this year, were due to transmission line failures that tripped the whole or a substantial part of the grid. The two big Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority power plants, otherwise known as PREPA, the Aguirre Power Complex and Costa Azul, and the two private generators, Ecoelectrica and Applied Energy Systems Corporation, are all located in southern Puerto Rico and transmit power to the northern part of the island, especially to the San Juan metro area, using transmission lines that might not hold up during the next hurricane. Furthermore, the Aguirre Complex and the AES coal-burning power plant are the two primary sources of toxic emissions in Puerto Rico, and disproportionately impact some of the poorest communities in the southeastern part of the island. The AES coal-burning power plant, which many of you may have heard, in Guayama, which transmits electricity to the San Juan metro area, accumulates hundreds of tons of coal ash waste at its plant site that have already contaminated part of the South Coast aquifer, which is the sole source of potable water for tens of thousands of people in Puerto Rico. Continued reliance on these plants for energy transmission to San Juan is another disaster in the making, in my opinion. Many people believe that the high death toll associated with Hurricane Maria, which we all know was estimated at anywhere between 2,975 to 4,645, is attributable to the lack of electric service to power life-saving medical equipment. The elderly are especially vulnerable during power outages, and Puerto Rico's population is growing increasingly older as working-age people flee in droves in search of job opportunities that could be locally available, with a swift transition to rooftop solar communities and other alternatives to the system that we have, central station fossil fuel generation, and long-distance transmission. Some groups have started to move to rooftop solar generation because these installations held up very well during the hurricanes, and they don't require fuel or much maintenance. The experience with diesel and gas generators in the aftermath of the hurricanes was plagued by fuel shortages, toxic emissions, and machinery breakdowns. I think you all remember the news reports and the photographs of people waiting in lines and trying to survive on other kinds of fuel generators. The Association of Renewable Energy Contractors and Consultants, otherwise known as ACONER, indicates that they're installing 5 to 6 times more rooftop photovoltaic equipment with battery energy storage systems than they were prior to Hurricane Maria. Scattered throughout Puerto Rico, a few organized groups, rural aqueducts, individual homeowners, small-scale farmers, and others are installing or planning to install solar energy systems. Casa Pueblo was the pioneer in renewable energy in Puerto Rico. In Salinas, a community group called Junta Comunitaria del Poblado Coquí and Iniciativa de Ecodesarrollo de Bahía de Jos, with which I collaborate, are running a pilot rooftop solar project from a community center and are training local youth on energy issues and plan to expand and establish a solar community. Tomorrow they'll do their first very own installation in the house, aside from the community center. Many of the existing community energy initiatives that have been focused in remote areas or environmental justice communities disproportionately impacted by fossil fuel generation. Although valuable, this approach will have a limited impact towards meeting the stated goals of augmenting renewable energy generation in Puerto Rico and transforming the system. Compliance with the existing renewable portfolio standard and the more ambitious targets recently announced by the government, foundations, think tanks, and other stakeholders require assertive measures and, above all, widespread community participation. The advantages of clean energy generation at or close to the point of consumption, or otherwise known as rooftop solar, are many. They include the use of existing sprawling housing development rooftops, urbanizaciones that we all know of in Puerto Rico, to avoid further impacts to open spaces, agricultural land, and ecologically sensitive areas. We all know that as a mountainous island, Puerto Rico has limited geographical space for land-based utility scale systems. Rooftop solar eliminates the need for large investments in transmission infrastructure. It avoids transmission losses, Grid maintenance costs are reduced and impacts to forest and vegetation as a result of tree cutting and pruning are minimized. The rooftop solar alternative doesn't require establishing extensive easements or servitudes on private property. It helps to lower temperatures within the structures and provides protection to the buildings. Importantly, rooftop solar installations add value to the structures and promote local wealth, which is badly needed in Puerto Rico. Distributed generation on rooftops creates greater reinvestment in the local economy than utility scale projects. It enables ratepayers to become producers or prosumers, right? So this is a combination of consumer and producer of energy, not mere passive consumers, and allows for control by residents and local communities, which is particularly important during outages of the main grid, as was experienced after Hurricane Maria. Rooftop solar enjoys broad support from civil society, contrary to land-based installations that have been the subject of considerable opposition. Currently, I think most people know that 98 to 97% of the electric energy in Puerto Rico is generated from fossil fuel combustion, and only 2 to 3% from renewables, not nearly achieving the renewable portfolio standard, which is law in Puerto Rico. Historically, the PREPA has made huge outlays of funds, up to $3 billion, sometimes up to $3 billion per year for fossil fuel purchases and payments under power purchase agreements. The oil, the coal, and the natural gas burned by PREPA and the 2 private electric energy plants in Puerto Rico is sourced from wells and mines far from the island, which increase the cost of energy generation. The long economic and fiscal crisis in Puerto Rico is in part due to the high oil prices. It is no coincidence that the Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Recovery Act, PROMESA, emphasizes energy as a prime area for critical projects that would be fast-tracked. Puerto Rico is also in the throes of social crisis due in part to the highest inequality levels in the Western Hemisphere, according to the Gini Index. Even after the hurricanes, federal funding has not alleviated high poverty rates. The Center for a New Economy recently released a report that indicates that 90% of the obligated federal relief funds that we hear so much about are going to mainland U.S. companies, not staying in the island and not having a multiplier effect locally. There's a generalized consensus that Puerto Rico must move to integrate substantial amounts of renewable energy and other alternatives to fossil fuel electric generation, even more so after Hurricane Maria. One lesson hopefully learned from the hurricane is the realization that Puerto Rico is located in the Caribbean, the so-called continent of violence, that is a part of a well-known hurricane corridor. The human suffering and the deaths associated with Hurricane Maria, the lack of the lack of maintenance to the electric grid, as well as other structural problems and deficiencies in disaster planning have been immense. In the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, the generalized lack of electric power from the grid and the grid-dependent photovoltaic systems that did not operate independently of the network forced Puerto Ricans to create alternatives to energize their residences and other facilities and to become more energy literate. No doubt that Puerto Rico and people in Puerto Rico are now much more interested in this topic than ever before. Although the government of Puerto Rico has announced an ambitious renewable energy goal, the actual allocation of funds for energy spending is going more towards so-called hardening the transmission system that would still be vulnerable to hurricane-force winds, to diesel generators, and the conversion of existing plants to burn natural gas and related infrastructure. Earlier this year, PREPA issued a request for proposals for an energy project for the Puerto Rico island municipalities of Vieques and Culebra that seemed totally tailored for fossil fuel power generators. No thought of renewables, right? And totally rules out the possibility of rooftop solar communities that would be especially well suited to the small islands. Subsequently, Siemens Industries, working as a consultant for PREPA, issued a preliminary integrated resource plan which would establish a roadmap for the Puerto Rico grid that would virtually crucify the island with expensive and probably fracked gas infrastructure, including a gas pipeline running from southwestern Puerto Rico to San Juan and four marine LNG terminals, liquefied natural gas terminals. The proposed Puerto Rico recovery plan should support efforts to transform the Puerto Rico grid with rooftop solar communities that pool available resources to operate as microgrids with the ability to connect and disconnect from the larger grid, along with energy demand management, efficiency programs, and other alternatives as proposed in the Queremos Sol platform. And Queremos Sol, of course, this means we want sun, and you can look it up at queremospr.com. I'm also proposing a center, some kind of centralized resource center for community energy initiatives and democracy. Because Puerto Rico needs to jumpstart rooftop solar communities in a concerted effort that must be led by civil society groups, because we're not going to see that from the government. The grassroots transformation of the grid and the entire electric system would empower communities and benefit the local economies. The organization of solar communities will mean much more than a mere technological fix. It will empower communities, allowing them to become participants in the production of electricity to achieve a measure of energy democracy. Many people fear that Puerto Rico's energy grid, and especially the transmission lines, will not withstand the next hurricane, which could be any day now. And so today is November 30th, so the hurricane season is officially over for this year, but we know that the next one will soon start. So now maybe we can go to the slides and see a little bit of this in a more graphic way. So everyone has seen many of these kinds of photographs where, the transmission or the transmission system went down in a very big way, and the different authorities on the subject, did their estimates, and basically, we all know we were basically 100% without power for a very long time, and we became known as Generator Island, and there were a whole series of problems related to using generators that are, burn diesel or even gas or gasoline. So we know it was a very difficult situation. So that's sort of a map of the historic storms, hurricanes that have passed through Puerto Rico. It seems that the red line, the Santa Rita, the second Santa Rita hurricane in 1920, is most similar in the trajectory to the Hurricane Maria. And so that's the grid in Puerto Rico, and what you'll note is that the plants are a lot of the big plants are in southern Puerto Rico, but we know that most of the population is in the north, in the San Juan metro area. And so there's all of these transmission lines, the blue ones, the big high voltage lines, are going up to San Juan and the nearby areas. And if you sort of imagine that previous map with this one, you'll see that the hurricanes are just constantly coming in through the east, and the transmission lines are in peril because of that. So, I mean, those are the lessons, and I think the important thing is the point at the bottom, that communities, I think what we discovered is that the usual narrative is that the electricity issues are much too complicated for communities or common people, and what we found is that not only is it not too complicated, it's also necessary for communities and people to get involved in these issues. So we have the We Want Sun proposal. We urge you to look it up. So the grassroots, civil society, and labor organizations coming together. We're well advised by the University of Puerto Rico faculty, both electrical engineering, but also social sciences faculty, because this whole issue of this huge transformation that we need as a grid needs to have a path for social acceptance, let's say, right? And so those are the principles under which, we're working on this proposal. And obviously, the workers are part, the largest union of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, are part of this group that's proposing this transformation, which may be surprising to some, but I think it's very clear in Puerto Rico and elsewhere that we need to move to a clean form of generating energy, and we need to do that with a just transition for the people who have worked in these traditionally, contaminating industries. And there need to be obviously resources for that transformation, for people to be able to have more readily accept the change that needs to happen. So the reason why we say that this can be done is because almost a decade ago, the faculty at the University of Puerto Rico put together a study on what would be the best way to transform the Puerto Rico grid, and it's very different. Islands have a few very big differences from continents in terms of energy generation. Puerto Rico does not have the kind of open land available to do all of their energy needs or a lot of their energy needs with utility scale land-based systems. We need to use what the professors call the rooftops resource, right? So in Puerto Rico, we've had a lot of sprawling suburban, urban development with what are known as the Levitt-type homes that were replicated throughout the island, and they make a great rooftop resource. They're cement, and cement with metal holds up pretty well to hurricane winds. And so, they estimated that back in 2009, that 65% of the rooftops, of the residential rooftops, would, with PV equipment installed, would generate enough energy to supply 100% of the energy demand at that time in 2009, when energy demand was much higher than it is now. We all know that since 2006, Puerto Rico has been in a depression, basically, and so energy demand has gone down. And also, NREL did a study, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, that indicates that we could also use a lot of our closed landfills, which we have plenty of, to install PV systems, and I would add also brownfield sites, places that have been severely impacted or contaminated. So fortunately, we continue to get information and studies from the faculty at UPR Mayagüez, and this study I think is worthwhile highlighting because it shows the viability of a very small and affordable PV system for general use and access of energy in Puerto Rico. So basically, this professor and his team of community savvy determined that basically with an investment of around $5,500, the average household in Puerto Rico could power, with some energy efficiency measures, could power their whole home consumption. And this has been, we've seen this, other people are replicating this and proving that this can be done because installation costs are much lower in Puerto Rico to begin with. So it is totally viable to do rooftop solar on a very large scale in Puerto Rico. So what's driving this transformative proposal is that there are very high electricity rates, and so people need to find alternatives. I mean, you saw that there are all kinds of people doing innovative electric energy systems, like the municipalities did some things. And as we say, we think that solar communities can function as microgrids, which is generate as a community and be able to disconnect from the major grid, but also reconnect as necessary, and also be able to feed into the larger grid when necessary. So we already mentioned the point about prosumers, and we want sun. And so one example is in Foquí, which is an environmental justice community because of the Aguirre Power Complex and the AES coal burning power plant, which is a huge environmental violator of environmental laws. And so this is the process that the community has gone through to establish their project. And so the reason why we also say that rooftop solar is a good idea is because much of Puerto Rico is flood-prone area, and so these are the Levitt-type homes called urbanizaciones. Usually the flooding doesn't reach the roof. So that would be one reason to, and we saw lots of substations underwater in Puerto Rico after the hurricane as well. This is an IEPA calculation. Actually, I modified this, and I'm not sure it's totally correct, but we learned that the Bostasur power plant is now burning 100% natural gas. So that means that the natural gas for energy generation in Puerto Rico is high. It's not a low number. And when we hear people talking about doing more natural gas, we should actually be thinking about doing more renewable energy because we only need 2 to 3%. I'm not going to go too much into this because I think someone else is going to speak about what the government proposals are. Except for, I do want to emphasize this. Now this, I'm sorry it's not such a great visual here, but basically this shows you, this came out in October of this past year, And it is, as you see, Siemens Industries is the contractor for TREPA, for the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. And these are the projects that the government is saying that they will do in Puerto Rico. And they in this way do a so-called transition with natural gas as a bridge fuel when we're way beyond that now, right? We know that the consensus is that renewable energy is cheaper even now than burning natural gas or even coal. So we don't understand why the government is insisting on doing all this natural gas infrastructure, both land-based pipelines and offshore liquefied natural gas ports. This case here in the southeast Puerto Rico, we worked on for about 10 years, and last week we found out that it is not going to happen. So that was defeated. But all these other things, and the government is proceeding with some kind of project in San Juan, and is not at all transparent about the what it is that it's doing. So this was the Actividad offshore gas port, which would have done a marine-based pipeline and terminal the size of a small town off the coast of southeastern Puerto Rico. That's actually a fishing area for local communities, which are very depressed. These are among the poorest communities in Puerto Rico, environmental justice communities, severely impacted by fossil fuel generation and other contaminating industries, and yet the fishing areas were also going to be basically taken away. But that project was defeated. And so those are not photoshopped. That's that real area that would have been impacted. I mean, that's a mountainous watershed area, and then the rest are right down in Salinas. And so I just wanted to give you a glimpse. I think you've all heard a lot about the coal ash waste fiasco that we faced with the AES power plant. That's also in Guayama and Salinas, Puerto Rico. And it's just incredible that this plant is one of only two within all of the U.S. jurisdictions that have no disposal facility for their coal ash waste, none whatsoever. So they tried to use it and used it for a few years as so-called fill material at construction sites, and that was stopped. But now, this past week, in fact, the government is proposing a new regulation that would allow for the use of fill material, of the coal ash waste as fill material again. So this photo is sort of in closing. You probably heard that the history of PREPA was that it was a pioneer in the installation of transmission and distribution infrastructure under difficult conditions and rugged terrain as a volcanic island, and they were supposedly the first to use helicopters to install transmission poles and towers and lines. And this actually was right after the hurricane, well, a few months after, between Salinas and Guayama, which is where the big transmission lines go out to San Juan, or page through Aguas Buenas and then to San Juan. And I thought to take this picture because it for a few reasons. One is that if we did this, and we were pioneers in doing this kind of electric grid early on and energizing a very poor country, so we can probably do rooftop solar communities. And also that, this is something that we should not be repeating at this point. We can do something better now. So I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so any questions? Yeah.
What are the assumptions in the idea study that you showed? Are they preferring to assert that for $5,000 you can have rooftop generation continuously? Does that include the cost of batteries? What is the kilowatt hour? I mean, I'm not aware of a single rooftop system that's going to cost you less than $10,000 to generate. So if there is one, I'd like to know where.
Yeah, and in fact, you know what? I can give you a reference for the article. It was published by the professor and his team. And he actually has an even lower price because he doesn't include installation. But in this calculus, there's a prototype of a system that's about $5,500 and powers a household using energy efficiency measures. Remember, installation in Puerto Rico is much lower. The installation cost is much lower. People are doing it all over. Casa Pueblo is doing it in Adjuntas as well. Anyone else? Yep.
What sort of a grassroots movement have you got going to move this forward?
Well, the groups in Queremos Sol, you'll see if you look at the website, there are a few of the groups that where we work most closely, and it includes environmental groups, it includes academia, it includes civil society and labor organizations, and in fact the electrical workers labor and the managerial workers at PREPA. So people know that transformation needs to happen. They're not, yeah.
I heard that we have to be connected to the grid and be authorized by PREPA in order to use solar energy. Is that true?
Well, there's an executive order issued by the governor, OE 64, back right after the hurricane. I think it was like October 2017, where he basically exempted all rooftop solar installations from any kind of regulation other than electrical code, certification from electricians. So that's still the case. I mean, eventually, I guess we'll see some additional regulation and some net metering provisions coming back into effect. Yes.
I've noticed that many households in Puerto Rico use air conditioners now more than I remember when I was little. So would this be allow people to still use air conditioners?
With the PV systems, no, it wouldn't. I don't think it would power air conditioners. I mean, it would power what they found, and it's in the article. I actually have the article with me, and I can share with whoever wants to see it. It powers the basic minimum, right? And most people in Puerto Rico cook with gas stoves, but it will power refrigerator and lights, especially LED lights, and other basic appliances in the household.
Yes. So how well, or what do we know about how well solar panels, rooftop panels will survive a hurricane? If you lose your roof, you lose your panels.
Well, you're not going to lose your cement roof, right? And even I've known of people who've actually, well, I mean, Casa Pueblo, the installation is on a wooden roof. And what we've heard from ACONER, the Association of Renewable Energy Contractors and Consultants, they say that maybe 5 to 10% of the panels were impacted, right? But what we saw with the grid, it was all down. Everything was down. So I think it's easier to replace a couple of panels than to replace a whole system. Yeah, back there.
So our company has been working with PREPA for a couple of years. And so from a solar perspective, we work mostly in smart grid. And I think what usually gets lost in our renewable energy discussion is the fact that the more renewable energy, especially variable renewable energy that you connect to the grid, actually the more risky the grid gets from a power systems point of view. Because now you feed variable, and with all the house, the solar and so forth. So the question is, so even though it's very easy to think that you're going to connect all of these solar, it's going to be the end of all the problems, and that's the main focus. However, what is happening on the smart grid level? Because all these distributed energy now needs to be connected to the grid, to the transmission distribution grid, and in order for that to be effective, you need to have effective islanding capabilities within your complete grid network. And we don't see those investments happening. So as we continue with these solar investments, you don't see investments into smart grid, which eventually makes your grid even more risky.
Okay, well, I think maybe I'll take the first part of your question first. The intermittency issue that always comes up, right? Whether if there's a lot of cloud cover, the sun doesn't come out. I mean, keep in mind, Germany, the greatest country in Europe, has a very high percentage of renewable energy. And certainly Puerto Rico has very high solar potential. And I think that what I've seen, and I have a document with me that I can share with you, is that the combination of the solar especially, the demand response programs, right? Let's work with the nighttime peak and time of use incentives, and battery energy storage systems address to a large extent that issue. Now, certainly power electronics, right, and smart grid technology is necessary, and I don't think anyone's saying anything to the contrary.
Can you comment on greenhouse emissions related to natural gas?
Okay. We found in the case of the Aguirre offshore gas port, which we worked on for a long time, in this case, we found that, well, as you know, energy issues are different on islands, right? So here in the U.S., if you have a natural gas well, you know, usually some pipeline is built to wherever your demand is, and the gas is passed through that pipeline and taken to the plant and burned. And so you have those emissions. But in island jurisdictions that don't have the natural gas locally, the gas has to be liquefied, right? And because you can't transport gas in its gas form because it's too expensive. So it needs to be, you know, submitted to it like a cryogenic procedure to keep it in liquid form. So it's known as LNG, liquefied natural gas. And when it gets to its destination, as it would have to this terminal here in Salinas, it would have to be re-vaporized, right? And part of it's stored in those cryogenic conditions. And all those emissions, in addition to the burning of the natural gas type emissions, but the emissions related to the re-vaporization jointly would be higher GHG emissions than burning the crude oil, the bunker C crude oil that Energia burns right now. And we have this not because I'm saying it, but because in the Clean Air Act permit, known as the Prevention of Significant Deterioration for that project, the natural gas burning would have increased GHG mass and emissions more than burning bunker C fuel oil, and also increased VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, which have terrible effects on pediatric health and the health of vulnerable populations. We also have that document available if anyone would like to see it. Here.
What sort of, I guess, like, where is the push for natural gas coming from? Is it coming from, like, energy lobbies or the government? Like, why is that, like, what is that push for transition fuel?
The push for natural gas. Well, there's a lot of fracked gas in the U.S. There's an abundance. The U.S. is basically flooded in natural gas, right? It's the number one, I think, oil and gas producer now in the world, right? So the Caribbean is like a nice, cute little close place to take gas, and I think that has, you know, that's part of the reason that there's just this overabundance that needs to be marketed in order to keep, you know, the industry going. I think that's the main driver. I think, you know, the natural gas industry did a wonderful public relations campaign for many years. I mean, they have really sold it well as a very clean kind of energy source. So there are many things. I think those are maybe the two main considerations. Oh, yeah.
I have some questions, so I could ask one first and then the second one. So, like, when we're talking about, like, an entire economic ecosystem, and we're talking about one sector, which is the energy sector, and, like, the money we need to pour into that sector to transform it, what can you speak on, like, how maybe the payoff is worth it when we relieve pressure on other sectors like public health? For example, if we take into account the coal ash mines in the south, like, what type of other, like, positive externalities could we see coming from that could relieve economic pressure from other sectors of the government once they invest in that, in, first of all, removing them, and second of all, moving towards cleaner energy production?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in that case, the Mount Sinai Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit did an analysis of the volatile organic compounds related to natural gas burning and found that the impact to pediatric health, especially, were, created a greater risk to those populations by converting to burn natural gas. So the externalities, which are often overlooked in terms of public health and environmental impacts and just people's livelihoods, the Fishers were up in arms on this, right? So definitely we need to include that in the calculus. I think we cannot take any more questions. Thank you for taking me.
I apologize to have to interrupt our speaker, Cruz Santiago. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Hola a todos, espero estén bien, espero estén pasándola bien por ahora. My name is Camila Pesquera, and I am from Dorado, Puerto Rico. Currently, I'm a sophomore here at American University, studying Latin American Studies. Also, I am the Outreach Coordinator for Puerto Rico Student Organization. Today, I will be your Master of Ceremonies. As such, to start off, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the night, Edil Sepulveda. Edil is a NASA scientist, licensed attorney, climate change expert, and diaspora organizer, currently living in Washington, D.C. area. He is a staff research scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, where he works as the applications coordinator for NASA's Carbon Monitoring System initiative. After Hurricane Maria's devastation in Puerto Rico, some of his work has shifted towards disaster recovery and resilience. Edil has been part of NASA's Black Marble Science team, which recently was awarded the agency's Group Achievement Medal for their efforts to support Puerto Rico's recovery in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And he has been named the coordinator for the NASA Island Communities and Areas of Intensive Risk Initiative in Puerto Rico and the wider Caribbean area. Besides his work at NASA, he is the co-founder of the organization Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora, which consists of a network of Puerto Rican professionals advocating for Puerto Rican issues from the main island United States. They tap into their personal and professional networks to educate and fundraise for progressive and community-led organizations in Puerto Rico with the goal of helping support self-reliance and resilience efforts in communities throughout the island. Before working at NASA, Edil was a consultant in climate change and environmental legal issues for the government of Puerto Rico. Without further ado, Edil Sepulveda.
I would like to thank you so much, Camila. I would like for the panelists to move forward, and I'll make a brief introduction, and then I'll present the panelists, and then we'll move to the discussion panel. And I imagine it's what you're looking for here. So, good night, everyone. We are very happy that we have almost full house here. Basically, we are doing this for all of you, and we'll have specific actions and assignments for all of you leading out of this event. And I hope that you had the opportunity to have some of the Puerto Rican food that we had during the networking event, and that you're taking the opportunity also to connect and engage with the diverse set of people that we have here today. Many of them, they share the same interests and the same concerns regarding the topic of the energy future of Puerto Rico. So, in here, for the next hour and a half, besides having to stand my Puerto Rican accent, you're gonna have a very lively discussion and a very interesting discussion about the future of Puerto Rico's electric grid and what are some of the current challenges, and most importantly, how we tackle those and what is the path forward to achieving a resilient grid. Before doing the introduction of the panelists, I just want to take a few minutes to give a background of why are we. I know that we already have had several of those. But I want to present what has been our focus and our priority for the last year since Hurricane Maria. and what do we want to achieve with this event and going forward. So, I don't know if they're showing the slides. Okay. So, as you all know, on September 20, 2017, we had Hurricane Maria making landfall in southeast Puerto Rico as the most powerful hurricane to hit Puerto Rico in the last 89 years. So that night of September 20, the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, that we all know as PREPA, they reported that 100% of the customers were without power. And basically that power outage became the second largest power outage in recorded history, just after one in 2013 in the Philippines. 2 weeks and a half after the landfall of Hurricane Maria, I was there in Puerto Rico. I was trying to get there like since the day it hit, and basically this was the first thing that I saw, and it was total darkness. And that was my first night there in Puerto Rico, visiting my parents that they live in San Germán, Puerto Rico, in the southwest part of the island. And I'm going to show you just a 2-minute slideshow of some of the photos that I have taken in Puerto Rico, not in fancy, not in high resolution, just some of the photos that I took and some of the work that we have been doing in the last year here in the Washington, D.C. area. Let's see how this goes. So basically, there is my parents, they got the electricity back 3 weeks after the landfall of Hurricane Maria, and that wasn't bad enough, compared to many people that were like months and months without electricity. So we headed out to the mountains, and as you can see, there were a lot of power lines down and a lot of landslides, and we were heading to Actividad to visit the Masol family that we knew from some of the fights before in 2010. We were very lucky that without any notice, that day that we arrived, the entire Masol family was there. Alexis Masol, that is the founder, Arturo, and Tinti de Ya, that you can see here in this photo that I took without Arturo knowing that I was taking the photo. Basically, they were working as an oasis in the middle of the town of Adjuntas, that they didn't have any communication, they didn't have any electricity, and they were powered by those solar panels that you see there, and they also have a radio station. So we agreed to collaborate with them, and we set up a fundraising campaign with their fiscal sponsor organization. We organized several events. This one was in the George Washington University. And we also started to reaching out and collaborating with other organizations that are here in the DC area. We participated of the first Puerto Rican Diaspora Summit, of the Puerto Rico Unity March, and we also began advocacy efforts in U.S. Congress. And we were involved with since 1 year ago, supporting the Marshall Life Plan from Senator Sanders and Senator Warren and some other of the senators. We came back to Puerto Rico for some work and some research work back in December, and this time we visited the southeast part that was the most affected. Those photos were from Punta Santiago Macao and Yaucoa and Maunabo, that were the most affected towns. These were some generators that were basically powering the downtown of Maunabo. And then this year we have continued doing work here in Washington, D.C., organizing some events. We organized the recent Puerto Rico Diaspora Summit. We have connected some stakeholders from Puerto Rico with stakeholders here, and we have continued the advocacy efforts in U.S. Congress. In fact, a couple of us were there yesterday visiting with some of the congressmen and congresswomen there in Capitol Hill. So just to summarize, what are the goals of us for this event and moving forward? Basically, we want to, as I said before, we want to connect the key stakeholders from Puerto Rico with key stakeholders from here, mainland U.S., regarding the topic of energy and the recovery of the energy grid in Puerto Rico. Very important, we found this was an area of opportunity here. We want to give platform and a forum and a voice to many of the stakeholders from Puerto Rico that have been left out of the conversations that have been happening in Congress and in Washington, D.C., especially the academic sector of Puerto Rico and civil society groups like the ones that we have here today. We want to inform and organize the Puerto Rican diaspora in the D.C. area to advocate for solutions for these energy issues. And the most important, we want to empower Puerto Ricans and the Puerto Rican diaspora and other interested stakeholders that live in this area of DC with information, knowledge, and ask of what they can do from here so they can help bring the solutions that we all want to see back home for our family and our friends. I think no matter the stakeholder, the ideology, or the political affiliation, I think we all agree, or mostly agree, on the desire to have a clean, resilient, reliable, and affordable electric grid in Puerto Rico. How do we get there is the real problem and the real challenge, and that's what we want to discuss with today's panel. But before entering to introduce them, I just want to make an acknowledge the presence of some of the collaborators and some of the members of our organization that they came from New York City and from Denver. Armando Santiago Pintado, that is there on the corner, he is with the local 32BJ SEIU, that is basically the largest workers union in Eastern US, or I think in the whole United States. Property services. And he's also part of the coalition that we are part of that is called Vamos por Puerto Rico. And he's one of the co-sponsors of the event, and he just arrived from New York City. So we're very grateful that you came and that you're co-sponsoring this event. And also Luis Ponce Ruiz from Denver. He is part of SEIU Denver, and he is also one of the co-founders of the organization, and he has been doing kind of like the same work in Denver for the last year. So thank you, Luis, also for coming and flying all the way from Denver here for this weekend. So I would like now to go and present the panelists that we're going to have, and then I'll go and join you there, and we'll start with the discussion panel. So first, I would like to welcome Katie Thomas. Katie is an attorney and the Energy and Environment Policy Advisor to U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders. She manages his portfolio in the Environment and Energy Committees, which include Puerto Rico issues. She's here in her personal capacity to discuss her work on the issues that face the people of Puerto Rico, including on the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands Equitable Rebuild Act, which was co-sponsored by 6 other senators in November 2017. She continues to monitor the energy grid, housing, education, labor, and people-based work being done in Puerto Rico for the Senate. Let's give a warm welcome for Katie Thomas. Second, we would like to welcome Neisa Alsina. She's another staffer from U.S. Congress, and this time working in the House of Representatives for the very well-known Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez from New York. Neisa is the Senior Policy Advisor for Congresswoman Velázquez and focusing on Puerto Rico, healthcare, and women's issues. Prior to this position, Neisa was the counsel of the New York City Bar Association, where she also served as the co-chair of its Puerto Rico Task Force. She's a member of the New York State Bar Association's Puerto Rico Working Group, and a graduate of Rutgers College and Fordham University School of Law. Let's give a big round of applause for. And now let's welcome Marta Dogan. Here is the first one. She serves as the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs for the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, that we will refer to them as NRECA, right? More or less NRECA. She is responsible for representing the nation's 900 plus rural electric cooperatives before federal agencies involved in worker safety, emergency management, and transportation. Ms. Dogan has over 30 years of experience in the energy industry working for a variety of organizations and companies. She began her career working at a consulting firm that provided expert testimony in federal and state regulatory proceedings on behalf of cooperatives, municipalities, and other intervening states. She then worked for a regulated natural gas distribution company where she gained experience in finance and accounting, regulatory affairs, and operations. She has been a member of both the board of directors of the Solar Energy Industries Association and the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. In 2010, she traveled to China as part of the Obama administration's first cabinet-level trade mission. And this year, she was appointed to the Southern States Energy Board Blue Ribbon Task Force on strategizing an electric policy and regulatory framework in Puerto Rico. Let's give another round of applause for Martha. We're almost finished. Two more. We'd also like to welcome Kathy Kunkel. Kathy is an energy analyst with the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, better known as AIFA. Her research focuses on utilities and energy markets in Puerto Rico and the eastern U.S. Over the past 3 years, she has written multiple reports on the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority's long-term resource planning, electric rates, contracting practices, debt crisis, and privatization. She has testified in numerous utility regulatory proceedings, including in Puerto Rico. Previously, she was a senior research associate at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and obtained undergraduate and master's degrees in physics. Let's give another round of applause for Kathy. Last but certainly not least, let's welcome Arturo Masol, Executive Director of Casa Pueblo and Professor of Microbiology and Ecology at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. His research interests include tropical microbial ecology and ways to use natural methods to clean up contamination. He has taken the responsibility from his dad, Alexis Masol, to lead the work of Casa Pueblo, that is an award-winning organization promoting sustainable development and an energy insurrection, as Arturo refers to, in the rural mountainous town of Adjuntas, Puerto Rico. So let's give a big round of applause for Arturo Masol and for everyone here. Basically join you guys and start with the discussion panel. Do you hear me? Yeah. So I would like to start with Kathy Kunkel. Kathy is an energy expert on Puerto Rico. So Ruth, she gave kind of like a brief overview of the energy policy landscape that we have in Puerto Rico right now. She mentioned briefly this new energy bill that is being debated in the Legislative Assembly of Puerto Rico right now. And we wanted for you to give an overview and a summary and the status of this new legislation, and most importantly, from this legislation, how will the bill reduce the cost of electricity for consumers, if it's going to reduce it, and how will the bill depoliticize PREPA, that I think is one of the things that have been mentioned in Congress here a lot.
Yeah, so before I get into the bill directly, I just want to back up and sort of reiterate Ruth's point that there's a significant conflict right now in Puerto Rico over the role of natural gas and renewable energy in the electrical system going forward. And although the governor and the Senate in this bill and the fiscal board have all articulated a long-term vision of 100% renewable energy by 2050, which is a very important policy consensus, there's also at the same time a push happening for natural gas development that has a significant potential to be in conflict with the the long-term goal. And I think that the Senate bill kind of embodies that contradiction in a lot of ways. It does, if it is passed by the House, which is going to take it up in January, the bill would enact a 100% renewable energy goal for 2050, a phase out of coal by 2027, and numerous good provisions for the interconnection of renewable energy and for the development of energy efficiency and demand response programs. But at the same time, the bill also puts into motion some things that are sort of contradictory with the long-term renewable energy goal. One of those things is a provision that all new and existing fossil fuel plants on the island would have to be dual fueled with natural gas, which would imply a significant investment in natural gas infrastructure to bring that around the island to various points. And importantly, the bill also continues the road of privatization of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, which was started this past summer. And the process that's been laid out for that privatization is a series of contracts and projects that are going to be developed without any significant role for the island's energy regulator. And so there's a significant potential through that process to have a lot of politically driven contracts that aren't necessarily aligned with a sound energy plan going forward to 2050. And so, I think there's a real question if you're going down that path of whether this is going to result in lower costs, as you were asking. And in terms of depoliticizing PREPA, on the one hand, the bill does make some moves towards reducing the governor's role in appointing members of the governing board of PREPA, but again, at the same time, by going forward with this very non-transparent contracting process for the privatization, you're basically leaving the door wide open for similar politically driven contracts.
Following up on your comments, could you just add some of the things that you would like to see added to this bill, so it can address some of the concerns that you were talking about? And as I understand, the bill was approved in the Senate, but it never reached the governor, right? So I think it's gonna be taken up by the House of Representatives in January. So do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, well, I think it would be important to simply eliminate that provision that would require all the new and existing fossil fuel plants to be co-fired with natural gas, for one thing. And if the Puerto Rican government is going to move forward with privatization, that needs to be done in a much more transparent manner that is guided by the Energy Bureau, which is supposed to be the independent regulatory agency for the electrical system.
We're going to be talking a lot. I think there are two topics that we're going to be touching upon a lot, and one is the privatization of PREPA, and the other one is the use of natural gas in the generation of energy in Puerto Rico. So I think we're going to go over those later on the panel. I just wanted to also give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more also about the Queremos Sol initiative. That is the We Want Sun initiative that Ruth Santiago was mentioning during her presentation. This initiative, there is several organizations that are part of this initiative. And as Ruth mentioned, we have there also the workers' union of PREPA, that is UTIER, that is maybe the most powerful union in Puerto Rico. So you, as part of AIFA, we would like to know what is your role and your contribution to this initiative, Queremos Sol.
So AIFA participated as an advisor to the Queremos Sol project, to the community and labor and environmental groups that were developing that initiative. And as Ruth said, really the purpose of it was to lay out an alternative vision for the transformation of the electrical system that we believe would do a much more effective job at promoting investment in renewable energy, particularly distributed rooftop solar and depoliticizing the electrical system than the privatization process that the governor has been pursuing.
Thank you so much. And so we're gonna move to Katie and Nasa after. On the side of the U.S. Congress representatives. So let's go. Katie, so Senator Bernie Sanders, he is a member of the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. The committee held 2 oversight hearings in the last year regarding the rebuilding of the electric grid of Puerto Rico. Could you give us, could you discuss a summary of those hearings and the results and outcomes of them, if any?
Hello.
Okay. Hi. Let me start off by reiterating that I'm here on my own capacity. I'm not here on behalf of the senator. And also just thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really honored to be here. This panel is incredible. So there were 2 hearings in the Energy Committee, which may sound confusing, but because the jurisdiction of the Senate Energy Committee, Puerto Rico falls under that as an insular area. So everything that has to do with any of our territories or possessions comes through that committee. There was one that was sort of, oh my gosh, what happened after Maria? Where are we? What do you need? You know, what's going on? And then the second one really was very much more focused on actual energy. That second hearing was really the first time that it kind of sparked that I understood that there was going to be a very real push to try to transition to natural gas in Puerto Rico. The senator thinks that that's an unacceptable solution for the island for many different reasons, and was really pushing the governor, his colleagues, and the Department of Energy to really figure it out how much renewable energy was going to be able to come into the island. And then shortly thereafter, I think it was only like a week or 2, the senator introduced his bill, which I think we're going to get into later. But I would say I've been cautiously angry that nothing came out of those hearings. Partly, I think it's okay that there was nothing that came out of them because I don't want to see the federal government take control of PREPA, and I certainly don't want to see the federal government sort of decide for Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico what their energy future is going to be. But at the same time, you know, I think we really owe it to the people of Puerto Rico, like any other state, like Florida or Texas or any of the other states that also experienced very severe hurricanes that year, to address their needs and get them what they need. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Katie. And I'm going to take the opportunity, now that we're talking about Congress hearings, on the side of the House Natural Resources Committee, there were also several hearings in the past year. And I just wanted to give a background for people that don't know about this. So I know that NASA, I'm gonna make the question to NASA, but on the side of the House representatives, Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, that is, NASA works with her. She became a member of the very powerful House Natural Resources Committee earlier this year. And as I understand, she is asking for a waiver to be part of the committee this coming year. So this committee has the jurisdiction over offshore territories and freely associated states of the United States, such as Puerto Rico. There has been a lot of talk because the chairman, the current chairman, that he's finishing later this month, next month, he has been very interested in Puerto Rican issues, especially on the public debt side and on natural gas, and we're going to be talking about that further in the panel. But I just wanted NASA to give also an overview and an update on the hearings that have happened on the side of the House Natural Resources Committee, and the same as Katie, if there has been any real outcomes from those hearings.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I I want to thank particularly our super duper intern from Congressman Velazquez's office, Camelia Pesquera. So thank you for helping to organize this. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank the 3 individuals who visited us yesterday, Arturo, because you met with a congresswoman, and well, when you came and you requested to meet with the congresswoman, this is such an important issue to her that she definitely wanted to take time and clear her schedule to meet with you. So thank you for reaching out and for making that happen. I joined the congresswoman's office last month, and I had a chance, preparing for this, to review the hearings that are online, by the way. And you should check them out when you can. In July, the reason why those hearings took place, and Ricardo Rosselló had been summoned, as had been Eduardo Batia, who's the Puerto Rico Senate Minority Leader, and others who deal with project finance, particularly for renewables. And the reason why that hearing was convened was because everything that was going on with the Whitefish contract and their ever-revolving door of the CEOs, and so they really had the question of should the federal government, take over PREPA, and so particularly the Department of Energy. As a result of those hearings, they decided that, again, the Congresswoman is in the minority, so I guess the majority decided not to move forward with that, but rather to really focus on depoliticizing PREPA and doing it in such a way, and there was a draft bill that I guess is dead now because now we're going to be in the majority come next month, but what they wanted to do was impose commissioners over the Energy Bureau. So selecting from a list and having the oversight board choose some, selecting some from the Department of Energy would choose, etc. So that was sort of how they went from having the Department of Energy completely take over to looking at other ways to depoliticize it. Now, having said that, the Department of Energy has provided a lot of technical assistance to Puerto Rico. They drafted this very long report that talks about what the future could look like. But I just want to take 1 minute to restate what the Congresswoman Velazquez said at that hearing. And, she did say that the federal government should not take over PREPA, as it does not need another level of control or bureaucracy, right? And she stated 5 principles. One is that any proposal must have local buy-in. She's very conscious that the lack of true community engagement would jeopardize any efforts. She says that the federal government should provide financial and technical assistance, that there must be an independent regulator that protects consumers, not necessarily one imposed by the federal government, that the use of renewable energy must be maximized. And at the time, she also said very loudly in that room that the Natural Resources Committee should not cut any deals for PREPA creditors. So that's what came out of that particular hearing. But looking forward, we are already talking to Grijalva, who was the ranking member, who will now be the chair of that committee, and his staff about having other hearings come next Congress and really to see what's going on. And I just want to restate as well that as a result of you 3 coming to meet with a congresswoman, she gave me follow-up assignments with people that she wants to meet with that on the island. So hopefully I have more news later to come.
Thank you so much. And we're happy. Basically, you covered many of the questions that we had. We were thinking, and I was going to ask you what were some of the priorities that your office was going to have coming next year, when basically the Democrats are going to take control of the House, and they're going to have the control of the House Natural Resources Committee through Raul Grijalva, that I know that Congresswoman Nidia Velazquez works very closely with him. So we're very, very glad to hear that one of the priorities is to hold public hearings regarding this issue. And I mentioned this to Katie because we talked about this with your office, but also with the office of Lisa Markowski, that is the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. And there was interest from this committee in the Senate, and also we talked about this with Brian Modeste from Raul Grijalva's office, about the opportunity of having one of these official public hearings happen in Puerto Rico. So that will be something that we are throwing out there to be considered. And we also talk about giving an opportunity on those hearings to the groups that have been left out in the conversations in this last year. There were always the usual suspects, and groups like Casa Pueblo and other civil society groups never had the opportunity. So we're very glad that you mentioned that, and that also Congresswoman Nidia Velasquez mentioned that yesterday. So thank you, and I just wanted to go back to Katie, and I know that we mentioned this the bill from last year that they gave it the name of a Marshall Plan, and it's the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands Equitable Rebuild Act. Could you give us an update on that, on the status of that bill? What are the chances that you're seeing for that bill? And
You're so funny.
I'm gonna ask you, what will be? I know that I can't ask you what are gonna be the priorities of the Energy Committee on the Senate, because you're not gonna have control.
You tell me. You met with Isaac Edwards. What did he say?
Well, I'm gonna ask you what is gonna be the priority of the office of Bernie Sanders regarding Puerto Rico issues for this next year.
I think the Senator Sanders will be excited to work with his good friend Nidia on the House side to follow her lead on the oversight and hearing opportunities that she's going to be pushing for. We're so excited that Raul Grijalva is going to be doing oversight in Puerto Rico, and I think we're going to finally start getting some of the answers about why the federal government has not cut checks for all this money that Congress has approved, et cetera. I mean, there's a really long list there. But for our office specifically, I think that when the senator asked me for updates on Puerto Rico, it's mostly privatization, the schools. I would say he's still asking about the PREPA, obviously. Certainly austerity is a huge issue that he's very, very worried about. The senator opposed the PROMESA bill in the first place, so he never wanted to have the junta in place. So he's always asking for updates on what it is that is going to be taken from the people of Puerto Rico, and see if there's anything that we can do to help. But while we are in the minority, I mean, the Senate, each senator has a little bit more power, but there isn't very much that we can do if Lisa Murkowski isn't going to agree to have hearings and help us get oversight. That's why we're going to be really excited to have the House, the Democrats in the majority in the House.
Thank you so much. You mentioned privatization, and you just mentioned it. Can you give us kind of like the take on what is the opinion of Senator Sanders regarding privatization of PREPA?
He's a democratic socialist, so no. Our bill had a provision in it that specifically said that any federal funds that went into Puerto Rico could not be used to privatize any asset. So obviously, again, the federal government shouldn't really be telling the people of Puerto Rico one way or the other what they should be doing, but it's our opinion that if it's federal funds, that it shouldn't be going to a debtor or to a private company to help them profit. It should be going to the people of Puerto Rico to help them recover from the storm. So I think specifically he's mostly horrified with how the schools that have been closed and that the schools that are being privatized, consolidation of the schools, but certainly we're very concerned about the privatization of assets, PREPA assets. I've heard Jose Ortiz say in person twice now that these concessionary contracts that they're going to be giving out, so for example, to a natural gas terminal, a company who's going to run a natural gas import terminal, that these concession contracts could be up to 40 years long. So that means that if they are really trying to get to 100% by 2050, that, all of a sudden between, 2048 and 2050, all of a sudden we're going to totally revamp the system. So I think it's the privatization is part of the problem of not really being able to believe that even if this 100% bill passes, that it's actually going to cause this transition to clean energy that the people of Puerto Rico deserve and want from the polling and all this stuff that's been done, this resilient infrastructure. So, yeah, no, we don't have privatization.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Nathan and Katie. And we want to move now with Marta, that she is the representative of the Electric Cooperative Association. And there has been a lot of talk about electric cooperatives in Puerto Rico for the last year. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to give the public an overview of the association and who do you represent and what are the goals of this association?
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's a great honor to be part of this panel, and I'm so impressed with the great crowd on a Friday night to talk about these important issues. So my organization represents the 900 or so small, not-for-profit, consumer-owned utilities. We operate in 47 states, and we serve 42 million electric consumers in the United States. The electric cooperative model is different in that it is not-for-profit, and so we are not worried about rate of return. We don't worry about Wall Street. We are strictly Main Street. To the extent that rates are generate income that's in excess of the expenses of the electric cooperative, it goes back to the members. It is a democratically governed and controlled organization, an electric cooperative. The members come together once a year to have an annual meeting and elect a board of directors that sets the direction of the cooperative. So as a member of an electric cooperative, just like a member of any other type of cooperative, REI, Cabot Creamery, lots of examples. As a member, you have a vote. And so you have more control over your energy future and the energy choices that you make on behalf of yourself and the community. So we've had any number of conversations with folks in Puerto Rico. As you know, there's a great history of many styles of cooperatives on the island. There are lots of credit unions. There are insurance cooperatives, or food cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives. And so the conversations that we've been having are based on folks on the island saying, why not set up energy cooperatives to be part of this important transition as the island moves away from traditional structures and the inherent problems that those have posed.
Thank you so much. So could you give us an idea of how could this model that will be new for Puerto Rico could work, and can you talk about some case example? I know that Martin Lowry from also NRECA was instrumental in the creation of the first electric cooperative in Hawaii, and Hawaii has, or is maybe the United States jurisdiction that most resembles Puerto Rico geographically, because it's an island surrounded by a big ocean, right? So, could you provide us some feedback on the creation of this cooperative in Hawaii, and how could this work in Puerto Rico, thinking about the challenges that we currently have, you know, that you're familiar with?
Sure. So Martin was indeed very involved in the creation of the Kauai Island Electric Cooperative. And there are some similarities to how that story gets told and what's going on in Puerto Rico today. As you mentioned, they deal, it's an island. Puerto Rico's an island, big ocean, big ocean. And the creation of the Kauai Cooperative arose out of an opportunity for wholesale change in the electric system of the island. The investor-owned entity that owned the facilities in Kauai had decided to exit the business. And so the people of Kauai got together and looked at a number of different models for the future provision of their electric needs and decided that a cooperative was the way to go. So some real similarities there. I think the challenges that we have to be realistic about include the following. An electric utility is a very capital-intensive business. And so we have to look very carefully as we think about setting up these electric cooperatives about the availability of capital. And there are entities that provide low-interest capital to cooperatives, and we need to explore that further. But I think the capital intensity is going to be a big challenge. Another challenge that we had on Kauai, and I don't think we'll have this in Puerto Rico for the reasons that I discussed a few minutes ago. The people of Kauai were not really familiar with the cooperative model. And the whole idea of governance, and the whole idea of coming to an annual meeting and being an owner, not just a customer, was somewhat foreign to them. So that was a big challenge in terms of education of the populace. And for that reason, it took a long time. There was a steep learning curve that was ultimately successful. I think that the final thing that I'll say about Kauai is, as an island economy, as Puerto Rico is, I think the reason to look at forming energy cooperatives is not first and foremost to expect lower rates. I think it's first and foremost to expect more control over your energy future and more of a say in what kind of energy you want, what kind of generation you want to look at, be it rooftop solar, community solar, other types of energy sources. But that to me those are the important reasons to look at creating energy cooperatives in Puerto Rico.
That's great information. I just want to move to Arturo so we can give him some chance to to talk. Arturo he came obviously from Puerto Rico, as he was Ruth also, and we're very grateful for that. Arturo, Casa Pueblo is perhaps one of the most well-known environmental justice organizations in Puerto Rico. I mean, many people here, especially Puerto Ricans, know about Casa Pueblo. Its founder, that is Arturo's dad, he won the 2002 Goldman Prize for some of the work and efforts on fighting against mining companies I think it was in the 70s and in the 80s. You have taken now on his role, and there has been a lot of work that Casa Pueblo has been doing beyond environmental justice in the topic of energy, specifically renewable energy. And we wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about some of those efforts in renewable energy that Casa Pueblo has been doing for the past years before Hurricane Maria and after Hurricane Maria.
Let me clarify that my father is still leading Casa Pueblo, and it's not only my father, Alexis Masol, my mother, Tinti Deya, is also founder and co-director, and she's a driver of everything that is taking place in Casa Pueblo. We have been running with solar power since 1999, and after the hurricane, it happens that we were an energy oasis for the community, and we were able to reopen and do service to the community and activate a humanitarian response. The word on fashion is resiliency. I guess we show how resiliency looks like. And what I want to say is to follow up on Ruth's presentation, energy and democracy. And I want to say that it's not about energy and democracy, it's about energy and the lack of democracy in Puerto Rico. That's the issue. And when I think about Puerto Rico and what is going on, we're highly divided in multiple issues, but I think there's two issues that we all agree in Puerto Rico mostly, with a few exceptions. One is that politically we need to decolonize Puerto Rico. That's a general consensus regardless of the political destiny of Puerto Rico. The political relationship, especially being here in DC, is not right. And the second consensus is that the energy setup that we have is not good either. And one way to start decolonizing Puerto Rico, perhaps there's an opportunity right now if we understand that we have to break that energy dependency and seek energy self-sufficiency. So if we agree that we have to seek energy self-sufficiency and the energy bill at the local level states that we have to move to energy self-sufficiency, but in practical terms, what they're doing is perpetuating fossil fuel dependency. It's not about asking politicians or Jose Ortiz. If they're kids, we have to tell them that's not the right way for Puerto Rico. We have to stop that from happening. And we have to, what we want to see in that bill, what we need to see in that bill, is not how the energy power plants are going to be transformed to natural gas. What we want to see is how those power plants will be shut down as we move to 2050. We want to see when AES will shut down, and we want to see how the other power companies will be shutting down as we move forward to clean energy sources in which people can actually actively engage in producing their own energy needs and to deal with poverty and to start a process in which people can, in practical terms, do some self-determination exercise of self-government on at least on the energy issue. And that will be my take on.
That's excellent, and I want to follow up. And you kind of mentioned this is kind of like energy independence vision that Casa Pueblo has. What you mentioned is kind of like the bottom-up strategy that Casa Pueblo has been doing for a long time, and that's very well needed. You came here on Wednesday, and we went and visited several congressional offices on Thursday, and we talked a lot about, obviously, going to Congress is kind of like the top-down approach that they have. So my question here will be and we have two representatives from Congress here, what would you like to see from the side of Congress that is different than your bottom-up approach? What would you like to see from them do so we can move into the path that you're talking? Or will it take, I know that Arturo mentioned that the last time that he came to DC, you posted a picture of what happened, and will we have to see you again protesting in front of the White House and getting arrested? Or what?
You're not going to see that, because what you're going to see is that we're promoting the energy insurrection. So it's not about me being arrested in DC, it's me about doing for the people of Adjuntas and building up a self-sufficient energy setup for Adjuntas and as a reference for Puerto Rico, that we can change our energy landscape. So I'm going to use my energy and my thoughts and my freedom to actually work toward that direction. But we're not getting the proper response from the top to the bottom. And I'm glad I talked to Nidia Velázquez again. She had been a supporter for a long time. And again, with Bernie Sanders, it's the same. We have to open this discussion to others, to the faculty people who have been working and thinking and about the energy future of Puerto Rico, not because they are looking for votes or they want to retain political power or because they have donors that are influencing their decisions. We need to put on the table people who are thinking about what ought to be done for Puerto Rico. The engineers will solve all the technical issues. Don't worry about if the sun comes down or energy storage. That's not the discussion that we have to have. What we need to do is think about what ought to be done to Puerto Rico and move forward toward that end. With regard to federal funding and allocation specific, A lot of funding is being sent to Puerto Rico. 90% is coming back to the U.S. So it's a, it's a good economical activation for the U.S. Not necessarily for Puerto Rico, but if housing, the Department of Housing and the Department of Education and others are getting funding to deal with those needs, they have to address the energy issue as well. Why not having all single school in Puerto Rico being powered at the point of consumption, not being dependent upon the grid? And as Casa Pueblo, the day after the hurricane was able to reopen, why not having the same resiliency at the schools in which students can go back to the school the day after the hurricane? Why not? So allocation, we have to tell them what to do. And if they don't tell you what they have to do, here's Ruth, I'm here, there's a lot of community groups. If you go to the teachers and the workers, they will tell, we need to move forward to clean energy sources. So we need to tell in those bills that funding should be allocated to deal with energy self-sufficiency for housing, for public schools, for public buildings, for people in need. There's a right of energy. It's not only for people who can afford do the investment for the installations. We need to help the local businesses to instead of shutting down. We need more barbers, solar power barbers and lechoneras and pizzeria and grocery stores. We need to help them be energy self-sufficient. That will mean economical activation for the island and a mean to deal with the economical crisis that we're facing in Puerto Rico.
Thank you so much. And can you make clear, and this was a question that some people asked me, can you make clear your take on the privatization of the electric system of Puerto Rico?
Privatization. Oh, we don't favor privatization. But let me say something. When you receive Jose Ortiz here and the politicians, that's a public setup. And they have refused for a long time to actually move forward to clean energy sources. So we don't want exploitation from private, neither from public processes. However, we think Puerto Rico will be more vulnerable if the public setup, the energy setup is in private hands. However, the transition is happening, and it's not going to be exclusively public. I think there's private investment, there's social investment, there's people actively doing the transition. So we need to put everyone on the same track and move what ought to be done, private or public, but we need to reach energy self-sufficiency for Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Arturo. I'm gonna go and go now over everyone and just ask some of the most important questions that I have left here, and then we are gonna go over last thoughts from the panelists, and then the ask that you're gonna have for the public here, and then we're gonna open for questions and comments from the public, because that's something that is very important for us, and we want the public to have participation on these issues and on this discussion. So I wanted to go back to Kathy and talk a little bit more about the debt problem of PREPA that I know that AIFA has written a lot. And this is something that is a little bit technical, right? So we wanted just some overview of this. Back in July of this year, there was a proposal to pay 77 cents on the dollar for about a third of the debt of PREPA. Could you give us a brief update on where do we stand regarding the settlement between PREPA and the bondholders? And most importantly, how does this affect the consumers of PREPA that are the people of Puerto Rico?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the short answer is that no one really knows. So that preliminary agreement was announced in July and has not really been publicly heard from since. So that deal has not gone into effect yet. According to the preliminary term sheet, though, what it would do is impose a charge on rates starting at 2.6 cents a kilowatt hour and growing to more than 4 cents a kilowatt hour over time, I think over 30 years or so. So, people would be paying for essentially the fuel oil burned in 2008 in 2048. And so, so it's not clear whether that deal will go into effect, but, I want to make the broader point that imposing a significant debt repayment of the legacy debt on Puerto Rico ratepayers is basically going to make it impossible to achieve the affordability goals that the Oversight Board has set for rates. And the board itself recognized in 2017 that a previous proposed debt deal that would have paid back about 90 cents on the dollar was too much for the economy to bear, and that was before the hurricanes, and now they're considering 77 cents on the dollar, and it doesn't make sense.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to move to the side of Congress. Either for Katie or for Nasa. I just wanted to know if, and I imagine I know the answer, but if you can comment on, from the side of the office, if you're pleased with the response of federal government and from the state government after Hurricane Maria, and if you can identify some of the failures you can mention, and what do you think can be improved?
Just yesterday, there was an oversight hearing, government reform, and Congressman Velasquez was very vocal again about how terrible the federal response was. And FEMA Administrator William Bluff Long was there saying, hey, we're not a Red Cross, and tried to also put some of it on Brepa's failure. And the Congresswoman says over and over again how Puerto Rico is a colony, and this is our problem, and you failed. And so, is she happy with the federal response? Absolutely not. Does she speak out every time someone like Trump says, hey, no more disaster relief funds for you because it's going to dead holders? Absolutely, she speaks out about that. In terms of the amount of money that has been given, particularly for the electric power restoration grid, we know that there's $2 billion in the CDBG DR funds for enhanced or improved electrical power systems. So we're really hoping that that's going to help the issue. With respect to how much funds as of June of this summer, FEMA had obligated approximately $3.2 billion for electric power restoration, some of it for fuel, for men on the ground, etc. So is she happy? No. Is she vocal about it? Yes. Is she going to fight even more now that we're in the majority? Absolutely.
Even also with the state government?
She fights with the state government. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I would say we're also horrified at the federal response, and there are some very specific, very racist policies that the federal government has enacted in the way that they are trying to distribute this money to Puerto Rico that they don't do for states on the mainland. So for example, Puerto Rico's been there for a really long time. We've kind of been a colony for quite some time. Not a secret that the vast majority of folks, especially in rural and poorer areas, they may not have a very firm grasp on English, especially when it comes to really technical things like an application for individual assistance from FEMA. And there was over and over and over people getting denied the help that they deserve, that they have paid taxes for, because they couldn't understand the form or they didn't have access to figure out the denial appeal. So that's one kind of example. There's also very unique things about, and I'm sure I'm telling you all things you know, but there's unique things about the way that property is held in Puerto Rico. There isn't always necessarily a hard title. So these are things that are not secrets. FEMA should have a grasp on the way that Puerto Rico might be unique in the same way that you might for any other state. There's unique things all over the country, and that's why you should have regional leadership way well before a storm like this. We saw the map earlier that showed all these hurricanes that have come through there. It's not a secret that this was going to eventually happen. And then, of course, the climate change is only making things worse. So I think we are going to fight to make sure that next time this happens, because it's going to, that the response is way better. And I will take a no comment on the territorial government.
Can I just add something to what she said about the title issue? So many people were denied because, as Katie, right? Sorry, there's as had indicated, because of local probate laws passed down from generation to generation, there really wasn't anything tangible that they could show to FEMA. So the result, FEMA was just denying them. Now, this August, FEMA finally worked with local legal aid groups, Ayuda Legal, Huracán María, Servicios Legales, and others, to put together a sworn declaration. And the sworn declaration selects, like, pretty much it's like it checked the box of this is what applies to me, and this is why I don't have a title. Well, what are they doing? They're now, FEMA's putting it on the local legal aid groups to then distribute it, to spread the word, instead of FEMA sending it out to those that FEMA has rejected and saying, here's another bite at the apple. So that's another question that the Congresswoman has put in the record for FEMA for the congressional hearing yesterday.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to go two more questions, and then we can go over the ask and then go over the questions from the public. On the case of Martha, she is just coming from Puerto Rico. She just arrived yesterday. She is part of this task force from the Southern States Energy Board that has been nominated by the Department of Energy to do some work with the regulatory framework for Puerto Rico. So we just wanted to know what is the role of this task force regarding the electric grid, and if you can comment on some of the relevant discussions and outcomes from this meeting that happened in Puerto Rico this week.
Sure, thank you. So we had a day and a half of meetings, and part of what the task force is trying to do, two major goals. One, to put together the future regulatory framework of Puerto Rico. There are those who keep reminding us there already is a regulatory framework, it just doesn't work. So coming up with a new regulatory framework for Puerto Rico's energy future. And also, as part of that, an important goal is to create a stakeholder-led process for coming up with that regulatory framework. So part of what we did this past week was hear from a lot of people. We heard from Senator Batilla, we heard from the Secretary of Economic Development, we heard from current energy interests on the island, we heard from a lot of renewable energy interests that want to come to the island, all of them giving their viewpoint on what needs to be done. I think that one takeaway that I had at the end of the 2 days was people are generally looking for action. We always need to be collaborative, we always need stakeholder processes, but it's time to act. It's time to stop talking.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to make the last question to Arturo. And something that happened recently in Puerto Rico, you were recently what appears to be the target of intimidation tactics from the police of Puerto Rico. And we wanted to know if you had any comments regarding the criminalization of environmental activists like yourself. Is this a concern for you and other activists? And what can we do to make sure that this doesn't continue happening in Puerto Rico, but also not in Colombia and in Brazil, that we know that many of you have visited, and we know the current environment there also conducive to this. So do you have any comments?
In Puerto Rico, we have a long history of political persecution. Carpetas, we had, my parents, we have carpetas before. We were arrested in DC because we were fighting natural gas pipeline, and the day that Nancy Pelosi and Nidia Velázquez and other Congress people went to Adjuntas, the same day, a few hours later, I was arrested again with my daughter, in front of my daughter after coming out of a pizza place. Excess of police force is not new. It's actually the excess of the police is under federal reform. But we're not afraid of that. I think that when you are helping Maria Medina run her dialysis machine with solar power, it's a good thing. When you're helping the barber to run her business, it's another good thing. But when you want to free a whole country from fossil fuels, and you want energy independence, what you're doing becomes a subversive action. So the expectations of political pressure from different points of view, it doesn't scare us. We're going to keep pushing forward what we think should be done. I want to say one last comment regarding policy. What we have done in Adjuntas, the barbershop, 2 warehouses, a restaurant, a pizza place, a radio station, a cinema, 40 houses fully run on solar power, 5 mini markets. We have done that and more with the budget that is equivalent to Natalie Yaresco's salary. And the difference, if you see what is going on from the top to the bottom, why we were able to do that is because the indirect cost, when you're allocating the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do the restoration of the energy setup of Puerto Rico, 30% is indirect cost. 15% is added cost. It becomes more expensive to do things when U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is doing that. So it's very ineffective the way federal funding is being implemented to help local people. One alternative, perhaps, is to channel that through the cooperativas of Puerto Rico and channel that funding through institutions that are already in place in a way that money and funding will get amplified through the construction and the rebuilding process. So I think that will be like a comment that I wanted to take the opportunity to state it before I go. But don't worry about us. And people who are in environmental struggles, we know what we need to do, and we're going to keep doing it.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to go over each one of you, and if you have any last thoughts, just very brief, and more particularly, if you have any ask that is very important for us, to the people in attendance of what they can do from here, from the diaspora to help.
So thank you again very much. I'm really impressed everybody made it through on a Friday night. One thing that keeps coming up that I do want to address is the local labor. We've been horrified to see that American corporations are the ones who have profited most from the disaster in Puerto Rico. And we worked with a number of the labor organizations to write language in our bill that would have required that, I think it was like 90%, I want to say, I'll have to look it up, don't quote me. The labor and contracts would have to go to businesses and workers that are from Puerto Rico. So you wouldn't be able to come in and continue neocolonize based from this disaster. I left outlines of our bill, the one pager on the table where you registered, so feel free to take one of those. You can also find them online. And my ask would just be to stay engaged. The diaspora is the one that helps inform me. It's all of you who help me understand what it is best for Puerto Rico. The senator is looking to the folks, especially here in DC, but from all over the country, and then of course especially Puerto Rico. And the last thing I'd say is the senator, which is where my brain has been all day, so I'm really glad I got back into Puerto Rico mode. The senator is hosting a Facebook Live town hall on Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We have a video that Arturo is in. A number of people from Puerto Rico are in there talking about what Maria did to Puerto Rico, but then also the need to transition to renewable energy in Puerto Rico. And we have an awesome lineup. If you're here in DC and you'd like to come in person, catch up with me after, and I'll make sure that you get put on the list.
I have to, and just to mention Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think is going to be part of the town hall, so just so you know.
Yeah, we have a real celebrity.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I actually have both an offer and an ask. The offer is that if any of you want to come speak to the Congresswoman, if I can get you a meeting with her, at least I can relate to her what it is that you want to say to her. And in that regard, please email me information. These studies, Queremos Sol, I've read it. I've spoken with her about it. Like these things are meaningful and they help educate. And my ask is that you get involved in organizations like Actividad. Teaches you how to advocate in Congress. And really, we need an army out there, and it begins with all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again for having me here tonight. And I just, I just want to reiterate that there is so much good work going on the ground in Puerto Rico with organizations like Casa Puebla and the Coqui Solar project that Ruth had mentioned, and that it seems to me that one of the valuable contributions of the diaspora, which you have been doing, is fundraising to support those kinds of initiatives on the ground in Puerto Rico. So please keep doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank Edil and the organizer, and just tell you that keep helping Puerto Rico seek energy independence.
Thank you so much for having me, Egil, and all the good folks have put together a great program. Shortly after, days after the hurricane hit, there was no availability of cash, unless you were a member of a credit union, which is a cooperative. And if you went to your credit union on the island and told the credit union what your balance was, the credit union took your word for that and gave you cash against that balance. If you believe that kind of community involvement would be good for the energy future of Puerto Rico, here's my ask. Please keep asking if cooperatives are part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to give the opportunity for the next, 15, 20 minutes for questions from the public.
What role do you see for blockchain in the future of Puerto Rico?
That is a very interesting question. One of my fellow task force members is actually working on how utilities can use or interact with blockchain, and she's reached out to the electric cooperatives here to have that conversation. I am not anywhere near smart enough to know anything more than that. Sorry.
I don't know anything about blockchain. I know they're in Puerto Rico because it's a fiscal paradise. When the people have to pay a lot of taxes, those people are there because they don't pay anything, and that's very an exploitation setup that needs to be changed.
Just as an FYI that's publicly available, the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee just held recently, like within the last month, a hearing on blockchain generally. It didn't necessarily have to do with Puerto Rico, but it just was exploring that issue generally.
Any other questions? Here.
Thank you. I know las cooperativas in Puerto Rico are very eager to get into the energy sector. It's a two-part question or two related questions. I think there's only one community in Puerto Rico, I forget the name of it, that has gone off the grid, that went earlier in the year. I forget the name of that community. Hay una.
Toro Negro.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just one, okay? So question one is, what does it take in terms of capital, regulations, just whatever needs to be done to make just one electric cooperative off the grid happen? So that once you have a model, people go, oh my God, we can have that. I mean, if you could go into the details of what does it take to do that? And the other thing is, I have questions about the Southern States Association. How does it come about? There's this whole issue of putting controls on Puerto Rico. How does it come about that an external organization is doing the regulatory work or pre-work for Puerto Rico? And how do you ensure that the stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean the working man, not the bigger stakeholders, are represented in that process? In Puerto Rico, those stakeholders are represented by very few people. Some of them are here today. It's not a whole network of people that are representing the bulk of the island. When you were describing the meetings you just had, you mentioned, everybody you mentioned, including the people that were coming from the outside with the renewables, has an interest that does not pertain to what might be best for the Puerto Rican people. If the Puerto Rican people decide that that's the best for them, that's the other thing. We've never even given them a choice to decide whether they want gas or renewables. They're just kind of been taken along. So you, as a cooperative person, of somebody from that background, how are we even ensuring that those interests are represented in the room when they're represented as a whole by so few people? And that really concerns me. And the other thing is, last thing, and then I'll shut up. There is this reluctance on the progressive side of the aisle not to control, not to put more controls on Puerto Rico, because it's a colony and so forth. And yet, we all know that the situation needs to be controlled, because unless there's some kind of jackhammer put in the process, we're going to go towards liquefied gas. And the only time that you see them switch, change gears is when the board says something. And the board is on board with liquefied gas. And so Nidia and Senator Sanders can call all they want, but unless they put some type of legislative wrench or some type of amendment in an appropriations bill or something, they're going to keep going in that direction. And again, it all goes back to the little, not the little people, because I hate that term. Where is the place for the working man and working woman in this process? I don't get it.
Okay, let me try and answer all the questions I think I heard you ask, and you can help me as I go along. So first of all, the task force has no authority. The task force is just going to make recommendations. And we're going to do that by looking at different alternatives to regulatory structures that people have seen in other places. So it really will be a series of recommendations that the people of Puerto Rico can take, ignore, throw out, put on a shelf, whatever they please. It really is, it will just be recommendations based on a lot of experience. I think your first question went to setting up one electric cooperative. And that's a great question, because that's how we're thinking about the best way to approach this is to do just that, to set up one electric cooperative. How much capital would it take? Depends on the size of the area that decides that it wants to set up a cooperative. This is very much a grassroots kind of situation. We're not going to come from NRECA in Washington, D.C. and say, this is where it needs to be, this is what it needs to look like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's going to be up to the people in a particular area to decide, we want to set up an electric cooperative. What my organization will do, and other organizations will do, is provide technical assistance. We're starting to do that already. And any other kind of liaison work that would need to happen between the people of this future cooperative, and for example, the Rural Utility Services, U.S. Department of Agriculture. That's a whole different world. Applying for funds through that takes a lot, and that's something that we have some expertise in. So the capital question is, and I apologize, but the answer is really it depends. The other things that need to happen are that people need to come together and say, this is something we want to do. This is what our governance is going to look like. This is what our bylaws are going to look like. These are the principles under which we will operate. And those are already set forth. If you're a cooperative, you live according to 7 cooperative principles. Every cooperative in the world does. In terms of regulatory structure, part of the beauty of an energy cooperative is that it is the members that regulate the cooperative. There's in general, no state regulatory body that determines rates and terms and conditions of service. Those are voted on by the members. So I hope that starts to answer some of your questions
I guess
and
get it
concerns.
with that corner.
So I mean, obviously our bill, and I think you know this, our bill would have put a wrench in it, would have banned the ability to move toward more fossil fuels. And I think this moment of this blue wave is the first opportunity that we're actually starting to think, oh my gosh, we really maybe could do something. So we'll be looking, we'll be looking toward Nydia Velasquez's team and for those opportunities. But it's finally something that is actually like it's politically feasible. So let's talk. Never shut up, by the way. Oversight hearings too, you know.
I have a very quick question to follow up. For the model of cooperatives, what is the size? Is there a limitation on the size that you need to build that?
No, there's no limit. On the mainland, we have there's no limit on size, either minimum or maximum. On the mainland U.S., we have electric cooperatives in Montana that have 50 members. We also have electric cooperatives in Texas that have 100,000 members. So there really is no limit. It just takes applying the model to the numbers that are interested.
Yeah. I mean, with the election, now the House will be blue. Next year, what powers the House will have to provide oversight at La Junta and break the conflict of interest that they have? Because clearly they don't represent the banks.
I hear you. So as part of the Natural Resources Committee that has oversight, I can't speak on behalf of the chairman, but I can say that there's definitely a lot of interest with these hearings. Also today, we were working on drafting bills that could speak directly, or that would speak directly to some of those conflicts. So we're gearing up for the 116th Congress, for sure.
Okay. Hi. So one of the guiding I coordinate nationally Vamos for Puerto Rico, which is a stateside coalition of labor, community, faith, and different organizations that fight for economic justice in Puerto Rico, especially in light of the fiscal and debt crises on the island. One of the guiding principles for our work is if you want to see progressive results, you organize for it, right? One of the issues I've heard come up regularly, I think for at least this side of the panel, almost everyone has said we're against privatization. We don't favor privatization. But I do see a conflict, or at least an inherent conflict, in stating we don't favor privatization, and on the other hand, we are actively advocating and organizing for a decentralized, proprietary energy system on the island that gets rid of the public grid and doesn't replace it with anything that is public in nature. So, when Tata was talking earlier about how PREPA was a pioneering organization after the New Deal, essentially, on the island. Why? I don't think it was only because of being able to install power poles on the mountain with a helicopter. It was more the fact that it was amongst the first, if not the very first organization to provide total electrification of a country, of an impoverished country, in a way that made sense economically. Puerto Rico, there was a recent report that came out this summer. The first Gini index was produced for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is among the 5 most unequal countries in the world. The reason why the power grid on the island works-ish economically is because you have the massive concentration. The population hubs on the island are subsidizing the provision of energy to poor and rural communities in Adjuntas, Utuado, Salinas, Guayama, everywhere. The way that energy is produced, yes, there are definitely many concerns on how that's been done. Originally, it was 100% renewable. It was mostly through hydroelectric power plants. It moved away from that as we started looking to gimmicky industries that we wanted to subsidize on the island, that we went to fossil fuels. When we started privatizing at the end of the 90s, we brought Puerto Rico back 100 years by bringing in coal-fired power plants to produce energy on the island. So I don't see how unregulated or underregulated decentralized privatization of the power grid on the island is going to really help us move forward in a fight for affordable, accessible energy for an impoverished country that has zero to little access to capital to be able to provide for a cooperative model that works for the entire country. My question to you is, how do you reconcile the proposal that you've been discussing, Queremos Sol, and other proposals that speak to similar alternatives, and the need for accessible, publicly accessible, or at least affordable energy for an island of poor people?
Let me say something. It's true that most of the people subsidize energy in the mountain area where the density of people is lower, but you have to recognize that the people from the mountains and the forest from the mountains are subsidizing the cities with water. So it goes 2 directions. The other thing is we need to redefine conceptually the approach to energy. And Queremos Sol, 50 with Sun, what different communities are pushing is that solar power and clean energy sources at the point of consumption should be the source of energy the primary source of energy for Puerto Rico. And the public utility, the alternative energy source to complete the energy demand of the island. So it's not about PREPA defining the country, it's about the country defining how the public energy utility should look like, private or public. We'd rather have it public, because if not, people in the mountain will be, and poor people will be energy left behind.
And just to speak to the question about the decentralization of the system, I think in, what we were talking about, or at least what I'm talking about in opposing privatization, is opposing the specific model of privatization that Governor Rosselló has been pushing, which is this, series of large-scale contracts that are largely unregulated and unconnected to an energy vision for the island, which Arturo was talking about. When we talk about decentralizing the system, we certainly want there to be room in that for municipalities like Villalba and energy cooperatives and different institutional arrangements that can take on that. And we also, I think no matter what happens with Puerto Rico's electrical system, there will be a significant amount of public money involved. And I think the question is, because I don't think there's going to be private companies that are going to invest in generation in Puerto Rico or in the T&D system without significant federal backing, whether it's loan guarantees or subsidies or whatnot. And so the question is, do you do that in a way where the people of Puerto Rico are setting the vision for the system that they want and the federal money is falling behind that, or do you have the private industry come in and tell you what they want to build and then have the federal money follow that?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that in the mainland, my members serve 90% of the economically stressed counties in the United States. So we are serving the folks who are making the decisions every day between prescription drugs and the electric bill. And that has meant that as we have grown, we've come up with programs that have helped low-income consumers more than some other models have. Would those all work in Puerto Rico? I don't know. You'd have to tell me that. But I do think the cooperative model, because it is such a democratically run organization, really does take into account everybody. And we have been most prolific in the remote and rural areas of the U.S. and suspect that's where we would be operating in Puerto Rico as well.
Hi, my name is Christina Banahan. I'm with the Puerto Rican Women's Council. And I just wanted to ask, to what extent do you know of any reports that speak to inequities on gender and energy access, either in Puerto Rico or in scarce resource areas, that could kind of shed light on disparities in electricity access?
I don't know, but I'll ask the Congressional Research Service for you. Yeah. Send me an email, don't let me forget.
I don't think we know. It's a good question.
Can you help me understand, in the absence of a massive federal input of money, where is the capital going to come from to do this transition to microgrids in whatever form? Because there are several alternatives too. And from what I know from the engineering point of view, the risk minimizing alternative is not necessarily the rooftop, but the mini grid that's kind of on a sort of a neighborhood scale. Remember, you have to minimize risk and have efficiencies of production. But tell me somebody please tell me, where is the funding going to come from to do that, other than the miracle from a massive federal outlay, right? In that case, we're done. We don't need to worry about it anymore. While at the same time, we are maintaining the secondary power grid that several people refer to, because we cannot unplug Energia Electrica. That's just not possible. We still have to have that backbone, right? It's a question of reliability. 2 years ago, in a similar panel, I asked, well, what is the kilowatt hour cost for the renewables? It's still not quite to that level, right? Where, I mean, it's going down. Well, we know that. But where is the financing in a country that, while it has a high Gini, it's not the fifth highest. England has a higher Gini than, index on Puerto Rico does, because it just measures inequality. But in a place where there are people who can't afford to repair the roofs, that are still leaking, right? A year after Maria, we saw that in the New York Times. Where one of those systems, we're talking about a significant amount of money here. And I don't understand where the money's going to come from to do that.
Well, what we're pushing is for 50 with sun right now for 2027. Like 50% of the total energy demand in residential consumption is produced by local homes. And I think we're not asking federal funding for Casa Pueblo, for the barber, for the grocery store, needed for the cinema. I think people in Puerto Rico are willing to invest. They're ready to do it. What we need to do is facilitate that process in which people can actually do the investments. The local government is talking about public alliances, public-private alliances. Why not doing the alliances with the people who are willing to actually do it? Of course, there's some people that might need help, and that's where the commitment from. There's a moral and political responsibility from Washington to help the people of Puerto Rico, because we can't go to Mexico. We have been helping people with natural disasters everywhere, but not everywhere can go to Puerto Rico and help the people of Puerto Rico when we're in need. Why? Because of this political relationship. So there is a moral and political obligation of the U.S. with Puerto Rico. And with regard to the prices of solar power, is way below bunker C and is below natural gas right now in Puerto Rico. So that issue of cost effectiveness is no longer there. I think it has been proven that solar power is more economically viable. Think about what it meant for Casa Pueblo having power the day after, as opposed to someone who was without power for 6 months, 7 months, that had to do long lines, pay for fuels, created a lot of air emissions, noise. I think that the issue of clean energy sources or fossil fuel is no longer over the table. I think that's crystal clear. The way that we have to go, people are willing to invest. We have to help people who can't do it. And I think it will require the participation of others. And of course, the federal government has a responsibility with the island.
So in the case of electric cooperatives, three major sources of funding for capital. One is the Rural Utility Service, federal government. And I have to say, and I can get you these reports, that the contribution that the payback of those loans has made to the federal government is pretty significant. There are also two major cooperative banks. One is called the National Rural Utility Cooperative Finance Corporation, and one is called CoBank, or Cooperative Bank, and they both provide capital for electric cooperatives.
There's also capital in the cooperatives on the island already, ready to be invested. So there's on the ground.
There is one more question, and then we'll finish, and then we'll have an opportunity to continue conversations of.
All right, my name is Tomas Esperich, and I applaud you for all of your initiatives. And my concern, perhaps Casa Pueblo has the answer. How are the laws, regulations, and policies in Puerto Rico affect all your permits that you need to build and operate a facility like yours, or any other agricultural area?
We haven't asked for permission. So we're doing what we're doing because we think should be done. But let me say something. With a public PREPA utility, we promoted net metering in 2007. We were the first installation in Puerto Rico. It was an energy guerrilla at that time because we had to plug in to the grid. We upgraded our energy system in 2015, 2016, 2015, and just 2 weeks ago, at last, PREPA signed the net metering agreement. So we were unplugged from PREPA for almost 2 years, and that should not be happening. That's a contradiction, of the utility. I think it's going to be worse if it gets in private hands. The permitting process for net metering and people actually, linking to the grid and actively participating, especially now that only 0.41% of the total energy demand is being produced with solar power. I mean, it's wide open for people to do solar installation, but we need to address that issue. I mean, not everyone will do like Casa Pueblo have been doing, but if not, I think people are doing it with, we don't want the anarchy, but people they have to address the energy issue. We need to, what? We're calling for the energy insurrection, so we're making
Any thoughts? So I think we're finished, and I'm very thankful that so many of you stayed until like 9 p.m. on a Friday to talk about this. And we're very happy that we also had Arturo and Ruth coming from Puerto Rico, and then other people also like coming from other places to be here. So take some opportunity to talk to the people here now when they left, and we're going to continue doing this. So we are doing the advocacy work. We are going to continue reaching out to the Congress. So hopefully you answer our emails and everything, but we also want to be we also want to be of any help, bringing information and everything. So thank you so much, and have a nice